Welcome to Teaching Truth. The Great Post Office Scandal. A book well worth buying and indeed reading. In April 2021, the Court of Appeal quashed the convictions of 39 former sub-postmasters, ruling that their prosecutions had been an affront to justice. They were just a few of the hundreds who had been prosecuted wrongly by the Post Office using IT evidence from an unreliable computer system called Horizon. When the Post Office became aware that Horizon didn't work properly, they covered it up. They tolerated it from within. And as a result, people like Alan Bates, Joe Hamilton, and many other sub-postmasters, and indeed the general public, were on the case of the Post Office. The church at Thyatira had begun to tolerate error from within. And Jesus was now on their case. In Thyatira, every trade guild would hold its dinner evenings, a bit like the Masons or a Probus club today. And if you were a member of a particular guild, the expectation was that you would attend the dinner. But through these dinners, there were those who would seek to influence the Christians in the gathering, that it was okay to have, as it were, one foot in the Christian camp and the other foot in the guild camp. It was William Barclay of Trinity College, Glasgow, who, in writing about this, captured it brilliantly when he said this, that, quote, "These guilds met frequently for a common meal. Such a meal was, in part, a religious ceremony. It would probably meet in a heathen temple and would almost certainly begin with a libation to the gods. The meal itself would largely consist of meat offered to idols. The official position of the church meant that a Christian could not attend such a meal." Enter Jezebel, who we read of in the letter. And Jesus said that the church in Thyatira tolerated Jezebel. And we're thinking today in our reflections about that sense of toleration, that sense of tolerance. And Jezebel here is a symbolic name. Jezebel here represents the despicable woman from 1 Kings. And if you know your Old Testament history, and particularly 1 Kings, you'll remember that King Ahab was basically the most evil and dirty and demonic king that had ever reigned in Israel. And he married this evil woman, Jezebel. And Jezebel hired over 800 prophets to work for her and killed many followers of the Lord. And if you know your Old Testament, Elijah was one of them. And as soon as he married her, that is Jezebel, Ahab began to serve and worship Baal. Now, who was Baal? Well, Baal was the false god that was constantly a thorn in the side of Israel. And Jezebel led people to commit sinful acts, sexual immorality, and to offer their food to idols. And Ahab, towards the end of his life, suddenly the light bulb came on in his mind after he heard what God had to say. You can read about all of that in 1 Kings 21. But so long as he was with Jezebel, he was tempted to sin gravely against the Lord. And Jesus said that Jezebel was committing sexual immorality and was teaching and seducing people to do the same through these trade guilds. Like an unfaithful wife leaving her husband, a bride leaving her groom, Jezebel, in a sense, represents things in our life that lead us away from Christ, things that lead to idolatry, worshipping things instead of God. Just as Jezebel was a threat to Israel, so the Jezebel influence was a threat to the church at Thyatira. Do you see the connection between 1 Kings and Revelation 2? The unfaithful brides, if you like, in the church at Thyatira had left Jesus, the bridegroom, by their committing spiritual infidelity. And yet Jesus here is graciously giving her, Jezebel, time to repent. Time like he gives all of us to repent. Ahab had time and did repent, yet this Jezebel in Thyatira didn't change her ways. So he would cast her onto a sick bed. And to put it simply, those who commit adultery, physical, indeed spiritual, will also face consequences. And that's more than a figure of speech, because there are some churches whose lampstand has been removed because they've allowed the serpent of intolerance to slither in to their life. You see, the problem with the church at Thyatira was they had tolerated the doctrine of Jezebel by a desire to fit in with the culture, by a failure to rightly define sin, by forsaking absolute truth for freedom to do as they wanted, and by their failure to take a stand for the truth. And the reality is for us today that we are in danger, if we are not careful, of doing the same thing, of tolerating a bunch of ridiculous beliefs, of tolerating that which is inappropriate. You see, the early church was married to poverty, to prisons, and to persecutions. And sad to say that the church today, or at least some churches today, are married to prosperity teaching, to personalities, putting evangelical heroes on a pedestal, and to popularity. Let's never allow the serpent of tolerance to slither into our lives, or indeed into our churches. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who said this: "There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." And we can easily tolerate Jezebel. Jezebel cultivated a following, a worship of gods, to the degree that the followers of Jesus thought they could operate within the trade guilds, but also operate as Christians. Without fear or favour, let me say this, that we cannot rationalise away Christianity. We have got to stand for truth and to be intolerant. Jesus is not beyond removing people from his church, even today, because of their intolerance to biblical truth. You see, Jesus is watchful of his bride, the church, and is giving here, in this letter to the church at Thyatira, a clear warning to his bride. Why? because he loves his bride. Let me conclude today by simply saying this. Let's never go to bed with Jezebel, but may we stand for the truth as the bride of Christ. And may we not allow that serpent of tolerance to slip into our lives, or indeed our churches, like the church at Thyatira did.